Afternoon, Genevieve. I'm really, really excited to have you on to the teacher's point of view this afternoon. I mean, you've had an incredible career, and you've obviously, I mean, I've been following you on social media, and you've obviously achieved so much in your career. I'd love for you to just explain what you've achieved, like your sort of route into teaching, how you've got to where you've got to as an associate principal, and I'd love for you to share like the awards that you've won over your time as well.
Hi, TJ. Thank you for inviting me. I feel really honoured to be part of this podcast. I am an associate assistant principal at a school in South London. I am also a head of science as well as a head of sixth form. So I sort of lead up two different divisions within my school. I from before I was an associate assistant principal, I was a head of science, and before that I was a head of chemistry, and then before that I was a classroom teacher. So over the last few years, I've been able to make the transition from a classroom teacher to senior leadership, which I'm really proud of, obviously. And during that time, I have worked on my practice. I've become more responsible in terms of the types of things that I do. I'm obviously leadership. I'm responsible for leading two different teams now. And during my time as a head of science, before I became SLT, I won a couple of awards, and one was for transforming lives. So that was to do with partnership and collaboration and enterprise through my work with STEM and my students. And then the other award was from the BYP network, and that was for being a role model as a teacher and as a up and coming Black person. So yeah, so that's sort of my career in a nutshell.
Amazing. I mean, what do you think? Because I've worked with a lot of teachers over the last 6 years, right? It's not every day you speak to somebody that's won awards, right? What do you think you've done to kind of catch people's eye and sort of win those awards?
I think that's quite a difficult question. I'm not someone who constantly sort of not brags, but I don't go on about my achievements probably as much as some people might feel that I could. But I think that I have really taken the time to build relationships with the students that I teach and other organisations. So when it came to my Transforming Lives Award, it had been the first time that the school that I worked in had run something like a STEM fair. So I took the initiative to apply for funding from the British Science Association, and then we ran this week of activities during British Science Week, which included partnering with St George's Hospital in University in Tooting, with London South Bank, with different colleges like Redhill College, East Surrey College, which is in Redhill, and really just forming partnerships with different organisations that hopefully have this beneficial impact on my students. And I think that because of that work that I had done and, taking the initiative to do that and seeing the feedback that we had got as a result, I had been nominated for this award and actually I won. And so, yeah, it was a huge surprise, but a really amazing achievement and something that I'm really proud of. And I think that might be, that's the reason why I would say.
Yeah, fantastic. That initiative, talk me through this initiative then. What made you want to volunteer, and what kind of impact did the initiative have on your kids?
Well, as a head of science, I think it's really important to not just teach them the concepts, but actually science relates to our everyday world, from how we get to school in the morning, to waking up in the morning, to, the everyday things, everything that we see around us. And actually, I think it's really important that we make links to real life context. And so science isn't just in the classroom, but actually it's embedded in every part of our lives. And I really wanted to get that across to the students. And we have, our students have come from a low socioeconomic background where they may not have had these opportunities. And so I felt that it was really important to introduce them to people in higher education institutions, in workplaces, and really bolster their knowledge of the types of opportunities that could be out there for them. So the feedback that I got from the students was, they're so much more interested in what science and STEM could, hold opportunities for them, and the types of careers that could be open to them. And as a leader in in education. I think that's one of the most important things, that we open up their eyes to the possibilities that are out there for young people.
It's fantastic. Like, did you always know you wanted to become a teacher?
No, I've been asked that a few times. I didn't actually. I've always liked science, and so I did a chemistry degree. And during my final year project, I actually worked as part of this ambassador scheme where my final year project focused on practical science in schools. So I would be based in the lab as well as visit a secondary school, in a couple of secondary schools that were local to my university. And so I was doing back and forth and working on projects that students could develop in the classroom, as well as trying to improve practical pedagogy, even though I'm not a teacher, but trying to improve practical awareness to help teachers with, classroom practice. And so during that time, I had amazing feedback from the school, from my supervisor. I ended up with like a first class on that project. And so it was like, okay, well, maybe I could do something related to school. So I did some work experience. And then I applied for the PGCE, which was supported by my supervisor. And during the PGCE, just, I sort of grew. I like the teaching aspect. I liked working with young people. So I decided, okay, well, I'm going to go into teaching and see how that works. And then like years later, I'm still here.
How much more difficult was it for, how much more difficult is teaching than you expected it to be when you first got into it?
I think there's this idea that, teaching is from 9 till 3. So you go in with that sort of mentality that it can't be that difficult. You get all the summer holidays, you only work from 9 a.m. and then you can leave at 3 p.m. And when I properly started teaching, I was like, okay, it's nothing like this. I remember I was a newly qualified teacher and I was literally one of the last ones in the building, trying to plan, and I had like really challenging groups. I loved the students, but their behavior was challenging. And although that was something that I had begun to work on and master during my PGC, actually being a teacher, a full-time teacher, was so different. So it's a challenging career. Like people underestimate the amount of work that we do. It's not just a 9 to 3 summer holidays sort of easygoing, relaxed career. And I think you can see that from the numbers that leave the profession. It is really hard work. But at the same time, you know that you're doing something really worthwhile. So it's sort of, there's apples and oranges, really.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of teachers do leave the industry, don't they? I've seen so many teachers that became PhD students back in 2015. By 2018, 2019, they'd left the industry. They couldn't take anymore, if not in 2017. I mean, like within 2 to 4 years, you kind of see if the teacher's going to make it, don't you, in some respects? And it's a difficult one because you can almost argue those teachers didn't have the right support from their mentors, or you can also argue, they were never going to make it. It's really, really difficult profession. And from your experience, why do teachers leave the industry sort of within that time frame?
I think that when you come out, particularly for a graduate, when you come out and you decide to go into teaching, you are obviously going in at entry level, but there's, it's quite good money for a starting salary. And so I think that attracts quite a lot of graduates. But then teaching is an 24/7 profession. It's not something that you just leave at the workplace and then go home and forget about it. It's something that it's a vocation, essentially. So if you're a teacher, you are a teacher, and that is part of your being, that is your makeup. And so I think that the long hours, the workload is quite high, and there's all of those different things where actually you could be going to a different profession, make more money, and probably not have the same demands that you have as a teacher. So it really is, you have to really love teaching, you have to be really passionate about it, and you have to be willing to, take some sort of, not sacrifice, I don't want to say sacrifices, but you will have to compromise in certain things to ensure that you are capable of doing the role. Essentially, it is very hard work, and I don't think there's any denying that.
Do you feel like the industry is a little bit undervalued?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, you see the teacher bashing over the social media, on the like newspapers, and so you think teachers get a raw deal actually, because we work very hard. We do one of the most important professions in life, and it's not an easy job. So actually, it is completely undervalued. And I think when you look at the profession in other countries, sometimes you see how much teachers are respected and how much they are valued in society. I think everybody knows, deep down, everybody knows that teaching is a really important job. It's an important profession. But I think that, there's this idea perpetuated that we don't work very hard, and we're quite lazy. And that's not the case at all. Teachers work extremely hard. And I think that, as a teacher, you just can't let it get to you, because if it really got to you, you'd be overwhelmed with the amount of negativity that sometimes teachers see and experience. So yeah.
Where do you think this negativity comes from, or this misconception that teachers don't work hard? Because you do, right? And I will vouch, as somebody that's not in teaching but that works with a lot of teachers, I see some teachers working 50, 60 hours a week right there. It's not 8:30 to 3:30. It's more like 7 a.m. till like 6, 7 p.m., 8 p.m. at times, when you're doing a plan and a mark and get everything ready. I mean, and then you don't really have 13 weeks off in a year. It's more like you have a couple of weeks off, because you still have to prepare over the summer holidays. You have to prepare over the Easter break and the Christmas break, the half terms. I mean, it's a lot for a teacher to do, isn't it? And to work on individual kids, because it's not about, oh, I'm going to teach 30 kids. It's about, you're going to try to get the best out of individual kids in that group, aren't you? And you really have to pay attention to each and individual student to get the best out of them. And those practitioners that do well in those career have the ability to differentiate really well, don't they? I mean, it's remarkable, like that people have this misconception. Like I said to you at the beginning of what I was just saying. I mean, where do you think this misconception comes from, or this negative view of teachers?
I think that, doing research over time, teaching was a profession that people went into for job security and financial security, and not having to worry about where their redundancy might come, for example. And so it was originally seen as a secure profession. And I think over time, not necessarily now that I'm teaching, but over time when I was younger and things like that, teachers were seen as, they're just there for that reason only, really, and they don't necessarily not care, but they don't necessarily put their all into their job. And I think that sort of has been recycled over time. But I think during the lockdown, people started to realize that actually teaching is very important. When it came to like homeschooling, and parents that were teachers and having to do two jobs at the same time, I think people realized actually what teachers do is fundamental.
I mean,
but yeah, I think
you
I
can flip
just
that
think it's an outdated idea. Sorry.
No worries. I mean, you can flip that though, because some people, like I had a friend a few weeks ago, and he kind of initiated this thought for doing this podcast. But he basically said to me, I don't know what teachers complain about. They've had the last 7 months off. So what if they have to work over summer holidays? I mean, you haven't had 7 months off. Can we just clear this misconception, please? I mean, what has it been like for the last 7 months to be a teacher?
Oh no, it's definitely not been time off. We had to adapt to a whole new way of working. Teachers are teachers because they are in the classroom with their students, having face-to-face interactions, helping them learn. And we had to go from that to absolutely not being able to see our students for ages, face-to-face. We had to teach virtually, remotely, through software that we are not familiar with, essentially. We have not been able to have those meaningful conversations and really see how our kids are getting on. And we've had to do that all virtually. That's been really tough on the students. So we've had emotional sort of issues to deal with. We've had to think about mental well-being of our students. We've had to go from teaching just in our classrooms to now having to move around to ensure safety of our students. It's literally been non-stop. And I know that people thought, okay, well, we had 6 weeks off, so what are we complaining about? Actually, it has been very, very hard work, like something I would never have sort of imagined teaching to be. It has been constant. It's been a lot, really, a lot.
So I was obviously speaking to John Tate earlier this week, and one of the things he, as a teacher, you don't really, as something that's not a teacher, you don't really think of, but he was sort of explaining like the mindset of when you go into a classroom opposed to when children come into your classroom, the mindset that the children have, because when they're coming into your classroom, they're walking into your space, you own it, don't you? And when you're walking into their classroom, it's their space, they own it, you know, and it's that mental battle, like how do you kind of like rewire your teaching style to make sure that you still own that space when you walk into the classroom? Because if you're flapping around for 5-10 minutes, I mean, the kids are just not going to buy into what you're teaching them, right? I mean, John says that he gets a task going straight away just to get them engaged as individuals, like to get them learning straight away. But I mean, how difficult is it emotionally, as well as like as a teacher, just to completely change the style of your teaching effectively?
Yeah, it has been. It's been. I don't want to say it's necessarily a struggle, but it's definitely been challenging going from having that flip of sort of environment. Kids are obviously well comfortable in their rooms now. That is their room. That is their base. And I think teachers have really had to be aware that their presence is going to be more important than ever. It's been, yeah, we've had to get used to it for sure. Going from classroom to classroom is just not something that we've been used to. I think we've had to be more prepared as well. So it's taken more preparation time, because we don't want to lose 5-10 minutes of the lesson where we are logging on and the kids are doing absolutely nothing. So we have had to really ensure that we are taking that time to manage lessons which are tight, and you know, kids are learning all the time. I'd say another thing would be that the students have had to be really resilient as well. They don't have that opportunity to walk from classroom to classroom anymore to get that breathing space in the same way. So they have had to really adapt to those changes too. It has been a big transition for us, and I think we've had to find just new ways of trying to make things work for sure since we fully reopened in September.
Yeah, I mean, obviously your federation is probably one of the best teaching training providers in the country, right? It's up there with some of the best, and you focus heavily on teaching and learning, don't you, to make sure that the teachers are always up to the best standard, you know. And I think a big part of teacher training prior to this year was you have to be a presence in the classroom, you have to walk around, like check the kids' work on an individual basis, and to make sure that they're progressing. I mean, how much more difficult is it to be locked into your 2 meter space that you've got to teach from now?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's had major challenges. We have to stick to our zone now for the safety of ourselves and our students. And we now have to be even more vigilant that the students are doing the work, because we can't circulate and we can't stand by a student for, you know, a couple of minutes encouraging them to get on. So we do have to, yeah, it's been tricky, but I think that the students have really got on board. Actually, they have wanted to just be back in school and be back learning and be in a classroom environment, and so it's them buying into that actually, although we can't support them in exactly the same ways we can before, we are there to, you know, we're still there to do the same things. We've had to do stuff like holding books up to check work. We are quarantining work so that we can then mark it a couple of days later. So that sort of thing. Yeah, it's been a new way of working for sure. But I think the thing with teachers is we are very resilient and we are very determined, and we're just adapting with all of the changes as loads of people are.
Yeah. Walk me through like how difficult it would have been. I mean, when you've obviously teachers heard the news when we heard the news as of the public, right, that we were going into lockdown on March 23rd, and what was the initial reaction from a teacher's perspective as somebody that's in senior leadership, right? I mean, what's going through your head at the moment?
Um, it was just a bit of a, it was crazy, if I'm honest. Like, we had never sort of envisioned having to shut schools and then work from home. Like, that's not something that we would ever have thought of doing. I know that lots of other professions, they get work from home days, or they may work from home permanently, but for us, that is just not something that we had thought of doing. So it was all a bit, whoa, what is happening? From literally, the it's in this pandemic is, or it wasn't even a pandemic at that point. It was a virus that was making its way through the world, to schools are shutting, there's a lockdown, we can't really go anywhere. It was, but we could feel it building, because that was the sort of time that people were queuing up outside of stores, and we would see, like, across the road there was a huge queue for, like, the supermarket. And so, like, things were building, and we had sort of ideas, but then it was just to lockdown, and it was like, right, okay, this is going to be a new way of working for sure. And yeah, it was a lot. I think it took a little while to sink in for all of us that actually we're not going to be seeing each other for a little while now.
Yeah, I mean, how difficult is it to transition to online learning?
It wasn't easy, if I'm honest. I know that we've been really lucky, where we have a head of IT, or computer science rather, who is amazing at what he does. So he really took a lead role in sort of managing and trying to support the rest of us in transitioning to online learning. And we all used a platform which was quite straightforward, because the kids had already seen it in computer science and IT lessons. But for us, it took us a little while to actually get the hang of it. I I lead quite a big team in science, so it was it was just new. We had quite a few meetings in the first few weeks of being at home, to really try and get a hold on what we needed to do. But the kids sort of just got on with it. It was more us having to learn completely different new ways of working, and trying to pitch lessons that suited everyone, as well as stretched the most able and supported the most needy, and that sort of thing. So yeah, it took a little while to transition, actually.
And how far behind do you think you are in terms of where you need to be to get these kids up to date with the curriculum?
I think that we're probably in the same position as a lot of other schools, if I'm honest. There are going to be students who really did buy into lockdown, and they were able to access all of the lessons. And there were students who couldn't access for whatever reasons. And we've had to really start from the same point for a lot of students, as well as really support those who are slightly ahead, because they were able to access. And we've put in place, sort of tutoring for our GCSE students, to try and get back some of that time. But we're just trying to do as much as we can in the time that we have available, and that's all we can do, really, and support them as much as we can outside of curriculum lesson time, because exams are going to be pretty soon around the corner. And yeah, it's just trying to support our students as much as possible in whichever ways they feel is best for them, as well as making sure we get through everything that we need to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you sort of mentioned that it was some of the kids found it difficult to access some of the resources. I mean, what was like the sort of the main reason for that?
I think there's multiple reasons. I think that if we think about a lot of our students, the types of, not just my students, but just generally, in being in London, for example, there are students who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds, who need that support. And we did really well with supporting our students, but there are going to be whatever circumstances that may affect them being able to access that learning. But it really does depend. I mean, we had really good numbers during lockdown, which I'm really pleased to say. Like, they were quite high, generally speaking, and the kids just really wanted to be learning. But it was individual circumstances, really, that meant that some students just couldn't access learning for whatever reason.
And as a teacher, how difficult is it when you've built a relationship with these students over a period of time, and you see that they can't really, they're struggling to keep up with the other kids, and then they know that the exams are around the corner next year, right? Like you said, and with the unlikelihood that they're going to delay exams, or they delayed it for 3 weeks, you never know, it'll probably change, but it's only 3 weeks, right? And that some schools have had to self-isolate for 2 weeks, so and other schools haven't, so they've got a little bit of an advantage that way. And then some children can't even access like Wi-Fi or get onto sort of learning, and it's like, obviously the way the education system works in the UK is that you get a certain percentage of like people that got certain grades, and you kind of you put them in tiers, don't you? And for what grade they're allocated, and those people that could have potentially got the nines or the eights would almost be penalised because they've been sort of in quarantine for 2 weeks, so they've missed 2 weeks of work compared to other children, and then also they might not have access to resources like some of the other children as well. I mean, like, as a teacher, how difficult is it to try to keep those kids motivated and yourself motivated to make sure that you get them to their best ability?
I think the kids are still sort of processing the fact that they have lost this time, and I think we are as teachers as well. And I can't say that there is an answer as to, you know, how we ensure that every single student is adequately supported and prepared, and that it is difficult because we just try our best to try and reassure them, because I know that this is already a stressful time for them, GCSE time anyway, A-level time anyway, and obviously having missed that time, that sort of pressure can surmount on these students, and all we can do is just try and reassure them and really try to ensure that we are teaching really high quality lessons, that we have really good resources in the lesson as well as outside of the lesson, and trying to encourage them to use their time wisely. And I think that is, you know, as teachers, we're not miracle workers, but we are just trying our best to ensure that they are prepared as much as possible. And that's all we can do. It is difficult. But I think that looking after their mental well-being is also just as important, and making sure that everything doesn't feel too much for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. With you talking about mental well-being, and one of the things that's obviously quite a hot topic at the moment is the free school meals, isn't it? And with everything going on, I mean, do you, like, some of your children, do they need access to free school meals?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're South London, so we're always going to have a proportion of
I mean,
FSM students. Yeah.
those kids that are sort of struggling to have access to hot meals, and how much does that reflect on their ability to learn, and how much does that affect? I mean, how much do you feel that the government should be sort of going back on the decision to not put more money into the free school meal system?
I can't really comment on that really, but I would say that, you know, food is important for sustenance. Like, there's no doubt about that. Students who are hungry are going to find it hard to learn. I think that's the same for us as adults. Without a proper diet and nourishment, they're going to find it difficult. And yeah, it's definitely difficult. Just thinking about it from a learning point of view, from a teacher's point of view, we want to ensure that they're in the best place for learning. So it is a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult when you've got this relationship with these kids, and you almost feel like you've got a moral obligation to give them the best you can, right? And well, the practitioners that do really well in the industry tend to have that sort of same ethos. And how difficult is it for you to go home to your comfort, right, knowing that some of these kids aren't going to go get free, like, a hot meal tonight?
I think, yeah, just as a human being, it's hard. Just as a human being, it's you think about children, they are the most vulnerable in society. So having, you know, thinking about that it's not nice. It's hard emotionally to think about children who may struggle to eat. Yeah, I don't think anyone just as a person can actually say that categorically this is okay.
No, absolutely. I think it's a little bit different though. You know, when you're involved with these kids on a day-to-day basis compared to people that it's almost like the people that don't see it, it's oblivious, aren't they? They almost like can ignore it because it's not in their face. But it's that much more difficult when you're a teacher, and it's
Yeah.
really difficult because you may not agree with everything that's going on in terms of the decisions that made, but your number one priority is to get these kids up to scratch and
Yeah.
get them up to a level that you need them to for them to go on and to do well, because ultimately they are the future of our economy. They're the doctors, they're the accountants, they're the politicians, potentially the president. You never know. I mean, sorry, the prime minister, and you know it's quite a scary time for them. I mean, how, like what more could have been done, or what still could be done to help support the kids that are from the most disadvantaged families?
I think that that's a tricky one because I feel, you know, there's multiple things that the kids could probably benefit from meals to transport to you know, IT access. And I think that individually schools are doing really, really good things for our students. Like for, I mean, I can speak for my school for sure. Like we, you know, we're doing our best to look after the key interests of our students, and I think that schools are doing that generally. Like we are working really hard to try and protect and support our most disadvantaged students for sure. I think that centrally, definitely there could be more funding, for example, to help support schools. It's just yeah, really it does come down to funding, doesn't it? Because everything else is sort of taken from that. It comes from a money pot where we can then access that and disseminate that to students. So I think it all leads back to that really, in supporting our most disadvantaged.
And what do you think, like, from the last 7 months, you've learned about yourself as a teacher, and what do you think, like, the biggest difficulties have been for you this year?
um it's a hard one. I think the most challenging has been being away from just the everyday working day for a teacher. So not being at school, not being with our students, not having the same working environment as before. Everything's having been changed. Um, so I think it's trying having to adapt to different ways of working, but multiple ways of working within such a short space of time. From working normally, being in the classroom, being in our own rooms, to then having lockdown, working remotely, to then having going back to a fully open school, but in a completely different way. So I think it's the multiple transitions in a short space of time has probably been my biggest challenge.
Yeah, and what do you feel like you've learned about yourself this year as a teacher?
Um, Resilience, I think. I want to say IT savvy because I've definitely become more IT savvy, but I think that, and I think this is the case for a lot of teachers, but the resilience, actually just being able to persevere with everything despite the number of changes and despite uncertainty. I think that uncertainty was a big thing, like just not knowing what's going to happen from 1 month to the next or even 1 week to the next. But being able to still push on and um, still get on and manage, really. I think that has been the biggest takeaway for me, that actually, regardless of the circumstances, you've actually been able to succeed and do your best.
Perfect. It's been a remarkable year, right? And I feel really sorry for those PGCE students from last year, more than this year actually, because they've obviously been trained in a certain way. They've only had like one placement, haven't they, compared to two placements
Yeah.
everybody else goes through on previous years, and they've almost had to rewire their teaching style as soon as they come back in September. Like they've been told to forget everything they've been taught and basically like follow the procedures. I mean, how difficult has it been for PhD students from last year, so NQTs this year, how difficult has it been for them to transition into becoming a teacher from your experience?
Um, I was a PGC, not a PGC, but a school's direct sort of mentor last year, and it's been a crazy year for them because, like you said, they've had one placement. They have then They've had feedback from one place, but then haven't been able to fulfill the year. It's definitely been challenging for them, and I think that this is probably coming back in September is probably a sensory overload for them for sure. Not just becoming a qualified teacher, but becoming a qualified teacher without as much experience as previous years. And then also coming back to working in bubbles and that sort of thing and restrictions. I think it's definitely been a lot for them. And support this year is probably going to be the most crucial thing to make sure that they feel prepared to continue teaching. I think that's going to be really important this year.
I mean, we've touched on it a little bit before, haven't we, about the retention of staff and within the teaching industry. And this year, like you said, the support for these NQTs is going to be absolutely crucial for them to stay within teaching, right? And it's difficult because senior leaders, they've got a lot on their plate at the moment. They've got to keep parents happy. They've got to make sure that they're not overspending. They've got to make sure that their staff is motivated and following procedures, and making sure that they're writing these procedures and following legislation and getting these documents written up. I mean, it's not, as an SLT, it's not just about, oh, you've got a 24-week timetable. You've probably got a 50-hour timetable because of the amount of work you're doing. And I mean, how do the SLT ensure that they're able to support these NQTs to the best of their ability to make sure that they don't struggle and deliver top quality lessons, but at the same time get everything else done? Because there is a level of delegation involved, yes, but it's a lot to do, you know, especially if you're a big school. You've got a lot to worry about. I mean, assistant heads and deputy heads, you're spending 2-3 hours on lunch breaks, like with students at times, aren't you? Because of like everyone going on breaks at different times, you know, and it's taking you away from your normal duties. I mean, how do you manage time? Because there is a low level of staff. I mean, you have low budget. You can't just take on people just to fill in the gaps, you know. You're making it work between you guys. So how is that? How are you able to do that effectively?
Do you know what? I think we've just accepted that this year is going to be a difficult year. It's going to be a challenging year. That, you know, there is going to be so much more responsibilities and demands for us, as not just as SLT but as teachers generally. And I think that we've just had to accept that and try to find our best way of balancing the act, really, because we, like you said, we are stretched between duties, we're stretched between leadership and leading teams, supporting NQT, supporting new trainees, and there's literally no magic answer. Like we don't have 10 arms. We can't split ourselves into two. We are literally just doing our best. And I think that's what I think any member of staff, but particularly SLT, are just accepting that we are doing our best. We are trying really hard. We are, trying to manage our time as best as we can to make sure that we're supporting ourselves and supporting others. And we've accepted that it's going to be a challenge, and that's all we can do, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Like for those that are listening to this podcast at the moment, I mean, you've obviously had a remarkable career, right? And you've achieved so much, and you could probably, as in, you would definitely say that this is going to be the most difficult year you've ever had, right? So anyone that's doing like a PhD at the moment, or is an NQT at the moment, it's almost like you've got to say to them, you know what, just hang in there, because if you can make it through this, you'll make it through anything, right? But it's a worrying time, and obviously some schools aren't as well equipped as other schools in terms of the way that they train and support their NQTs and their PGCE students. And unfortunately, you'll see that some NQTs or PGCE students will leave the industry after this year, which is unfortunate because they haven't received the support. But for anyone that's doing their PGCE at the moment, or any NQTs that are still like in their training year and they need a bit of advice or a little bit of motivation to stay within teaching, like what would you advise them?
I think the main thing I would say is cut yourself some slack. This is something that we would never have imagined. This is not something that any of us have lived through. This is a global pandemic. You are in the classroom, you're teaching young people, you are providing them with an education. You cannot put so much pressure on yourself. You are going to find it a challenge. All of us are finding it challenging this year. This is not easy for any of us. We are just doing our best, and you really need to remember that you are still doing amazing things. Teaching is not an easy career, as it is, and teaching is definitely not an easy career in a pandemic. And so just cut yourself some slack and just don't be too impatient or hard or intolerable of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that teaching's quite easy. You go up in front of 30 kids and you literally just talk at them and they'll learn and pass their exams, right? I mean, there's a lot more involved, isn't there? And I'm sure PhD students are probably like at the forefront of it now, and they're probably a little bit like, oh God, how can I do this? But we need teachers, don't we? We need, I mean, we need, sorry, let me just rephrase that. Obviously, it's not enough to want to go into teaching because you think it's a secure job with everything going on. I mean, that's the absolutely wrong reason to go into teaching, right? I mean, you want to do it because you want to make a difference, you know. And why is it that much more important that we find those teachers or those graduates that are motivated to making a difference more than ever?
We want to, I think the main reason is we want to build and develop young people who are going to go out and make positive contributions to society. Teaching is not just about teaching our curriculum and teaching the content for our subject. It's actually about making an individual well-rounded and someone who's going to go on and, you know, positively contribute to society. We're making a global citizen, essentially. And so it's not just enough to be passionate in your subject. Of course, that is extremely important. Of course it is. But actually, we need to go on and nurture children. We want to develop children, not just academically, but physically, emotionally, mentally. We want to encourage their growth and development. We want to build young people that are going to be passionate and, you know, impactful and, you know, are able to really impact the society, essentially. So it's really important that we are able to have teachers who care about the young people that they are teaching, as well as, you know, take into account the types of backgrounds that they might be coming from, particularly when you're working in areas like London or rural areas where children don't have as much going on outside of school. And so it's really important to remember that these are individuals that we are shaping to become the next generation of whatever it is, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. It's bizarre, isn't it? Because like in most years, right, you'd have a PC student or a teacher that would come in interview, and you do a lesson observation, and there's certain criteria that you've obviously got to tick to get the job and get to the interview stage. I mean, this year lesson observations are going to be a little bit more tricky, especially for anyone that's a PT student at the moment that's worried about sort of finding a job for next year. I mean, it's different because you can't be as animated in front of the room. You can't walk around. You can't check individual books. So it's very difficult to check if you're making progress, especially because you don't have that rapport with the students. You know, I mean, when you go fresh into a classroom as a teacher and you don't know the kids, and it's always that much more difficult. But even that much more difficult in COVID restrictions, right? Like, what advice can you give them for when they do their lesson observation? How can they stand out compared to other teachers that are going for the job?
That's an interesting one, actually. Like you said, it is going to be difficult because we can't judge them in the same way, in exactly the same ways as, you know, a normal year. I think that ultimately progress of students is the most important thing during a lesson, whether they are making progress in that lesson and making progress over time. I would say that they really need to look at strategies of assessment for learning, actually. Although they can't check books necessarily, they can be using things like questioning to determine how a student is progressing in the lessons. A question is a really important thing.
Would
It
you
also allows you to differentiate.
would you
What's
would
that,
you ask,
sorry?
would you ask the individual students? So imagine you've got 30 kids. Would you go and ask every single student?
I would definitely be aiming to ask every student a question during the lesson. You think about a lesson is 50 minutes. That is enough time essentially to question every student. But not necessarily, it doesn't, I'm not saying put any pressure on yourself to question 30 students in a lesson, but definitely thinking about the types of questions that they're asking. You think about the most able students, their types of questions should actually be very different from a question that you might ask a student who is a target grade of 3 and has SEN needs, for example. The types of questioning that you're directing at students will be different. I think uses of like mini whiteboards are really good to show like mass rapid feedback. That would be something that I'd be looking for. And just pit stops within the lesson. So learning pit stops, going back and checking progress of students at intermittent points in the lesson to really show that you are thinking about how they're progressing in the lesson. I think those are things I would be looking for a PGC student to do, even though they can't look through books and, you know, circulate the room in the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because, like I said before, I mean, normally you'd go around and check people's what the pupils' books and see how they're getting on. But it's, I mean, you said the lesson's 15 minutes. I mean, for some interviews in some schools, it's like 30-minute preparation. You know, so you can't even ask 10 students probably in that time. You know, it's quite difficult to maybe really emphasize what you're able to do as a teacher, especially, like I said, you don't know the kids. And I mean, it's challenging in the best of years, let alone in a year like this. Some of the PhD students I have spoken to, actually, they're a little bit worried about what the situation is going to be like for next September, and are there going to be jobs, and are there going to be vacancies, and what are they doing their PhD for? I mean, some are actually pretty worried, you know. And what do you think the future of recruitment in schools looks like? Do you think there will be more openings for next September, or those PhD students that are worried, should they be worried?
I completely understand what they're probably going through. You know, it is, being a PGC student is tough at the best of times, and then thinking about trying to get a job is tough at the best of times, let alone in a pandemic. But I would say that I don't think that jobs are going anywhere, if I'm honest. You know, like schools, there are children moving through education all the time. Like, it doesn't stop. And particularly with the types of retention issues that are found in the profession, there are going to be jobs there for PGC students. And I think that rather than necessarily focusing on their job for September, although that is important, really just take the time to try and master. They're not going to master in a year, but really trying to take the time to learn the craft, because teaching is, as we said, it's a vocation. It's something that they hopefully will be doing for a long period of time. So really using the time that they have in schools, although it's different now than it was 2 years ago, really making sure that they use that time to learn. I don't think jobs are going anywhere. I do think there's going to be lots of positions, as there always are, as the year goes by. And I think that by the time they get to January, February, March, you'll start to see more and more vacancies come up. And so hopefully there's something out there for everyone.
Fantastic. I also, just to kind of add on to that, I mean, I've also spoken to a lot of graduates recently, and a couple of them are actually applying for teacher training next September, and they've had a couple of universities that have come back to them and rejected their application. I'm talking about people that have studied biology, and I'm talking about people that have studied like sciences, and you know, and it's like, I mean, we need teachers more than ever. Like, why would universities be rejecting applications?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. I didn't even know that was the thing.
I didn't know that.
I didn't even know that was the thing. No. I do know one PGC student that I briefly had communication with. Not, you know, I don't work with her or anything, but she has told me that the PGC is online. So I don't know if it's probably to do with the whole new way of working at universities, where capacity is probably not the same as it was. But no, I didn't know that was a thing. I have no idea why that would be happening. I guess everything has changed this year, and you know, there are going to be some cutbacks and negative impacts of everything that's happened. And yeah, I would say just keep trying. That's all I could. Yeah, no idea, basically, TJ.
Yeah, could you give any advice to them? I mean, I've obviously worked with a lot of graduates, and I've always find that sometimes, you know, well, I don't always find, I mean, sometimes I find that when I get a graduate into a school, that the school really like and buy into them and see that they have a passion for wanting to become a teacher, and they usually support them through their UCAS or what can graduates do to kind of, the ones that have been rejected from universities for some bizarre reason, which I don't know what it is, but what can you advise them to do to kind of get their foot into the door?
I mean, it's going to be harder now because a lot of schools probably won't have visitors and that sort of thing, because of restrictions, obviously. But the main thing they should be doing is just trying to get experience in a school. I would say that there are lots of positions for teaching assistants, We always need teaching assistants. They're just as important as teachers, and really trying to get into a TA position, or even whether that's full-time or part-time, but trying to get that experience so that they can be in school, they can be shadowing teachers, they can be shadowing students, becoming acclimatized to a school environment, and really trying to get that experience so actually they can use that to try and get their foot in the door for the next academic year, I would say is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, I'll be very honest. There's obviously a couple of head teachers. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a couple of head teachers that I've put on social media recently. We don't need TAs. We don't take TAs on. We never have. And obviously for graduates, that's quite disheartening to hear, But can you just say on the record, like, there are a lot of TA vacancies out there for graduates, aren't there? And it is such an important, it's a fantastic way to get your foot through the door, gain some experience, and you never know, like, it could open the doors for you to, sometimes schools will actually just take you on and do teacher training with you, won't they? It's a fantastic way to get in. So if obviously anyone is listening to this as a graduate, if your PGC application's been unsuccessful, get into schools. I guarantee you, like, you gain that experience within a school, like, doors will naturally open for you anyway. I mean, like, is there, like, imagine I'm the PhD student, right? And I mean, I've done my lesson observation and I've done phenomenally well. I mean, I've got the kids engaged and they made loads of progress. What are you looking for me to say in the actual interview bit? Like, what are you looking for? What do you want me to demonstrate in the conversation we have?
I think two things. One is the passion about the subject. They're obviously a graduate. You have spent years honing your craft and becoming, a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of whatever, the arts, whatever it is. You've spent years doing that. That passion for your subject really needs to come across. We want to see enthusiasm. We want to see that you are willing to take that subject knowledge and turn that into pedagogical knowledge. And the second thing would be enthusiasm and passion about young people. Like we said before in the earlier questions, teaching is not just about teaching a subject, but it's about showing that you care about young people and their development. So those are the two things that I would be looking for, or a senior member of staff would be looking for in an interview: subject and young people, essentially.
Fantastic. And like for those that do come in and interview, like, are there any right or wrong answers that they need to be wary about?
Right or wrong answers?
Is there anything that they could say that would be a deal breaker for you as somebody that's interviewing them?
I just think that just like with any interview, you would come in prepared and knowing about the type of setting that you're stepping into. So it's just, I'd say, not a wrong thing, but something that we'd look at kind of, it's a bit odd, just not knowing anything about where you've come to interview. Like, doing research is a right thing to do, making sure that you are aware of the surroundings and the type of children that you'd be working with, and the history of the school, for example. And also coming with questions is also a really good thing as well. Having some questions about the potential workplace, the potential employers, is always really nice in an interview too.
Yeah, fantastic. Obviously, you've progressed so much and you've done really well in your career. I mean, what's next for you? Like, what are your plans? I mean, you're working on a project at the moment, aren't you? So talk to us about this project.
So Young Gifted in STEM is a new initiative that I decided to create and found early this year. So January, I launched it. I did a talk at the Association for Science Education conference, and it's basically trying to improve the engagement and the experiences of young Black, Asian, minority ethnic students in STEM subjects. When we think about Black students, so these are statistics that I've taken obviously from a reference, but 6.2% of UK based and homegrown students are Black in STEM. 6% is, although, we have lower percentages when we talk about the general population, actually 6% of the STEM graduates is really low. And as someone who came from a STEM background, someone who's Black Caribbean, who was born and raised in South London, I just think it's really important to try and improve the numbers of different minority groups in STEM. And, you know, STEM is, the workforce has a major shortage, and the skills that you acquire doing a STEM degree are transferable in so many different careers. And doing a STEM degree actually opens up a lot of doors for you, regardless of whether you go on to be part of that STEM workforce or not. But I just think there's so many opportunities out there that young people are not able to access. And really, that's what I'm trying to do with Young Gifted in STEM. It is new, it's a baby, but we had our launch event on last Saturday, actually. And so we had representatives from PwC, from London South Bank, from the Royal College of Pathology, as well as some young people who are in STEM and who are really successful and who gave amazing keynote speeches. So yeah, that's what YGA STEM is. YGA STEM, Young Gifted in STEM. We've got a website, younggiftedinstem.co.uk, and it's just really for young people and also STEM teachers to sort of think about the types of opportunities that they could be passing on to their young people.
Absolutely. So obviously this isn't something that's a part of your school, is it? This is something you're doing on a separate basis. So I mean, Jesus Christ. So you've got your work cut out ahead of you, haven't you? I mean, you're not only working in the hardest year we've ever had as a country, as a globe, but I mean, you've also got this project going on the side. I mean, how are you juggling being able to teach as well as starting this new project? I mean, congratulations on your launch, by the way. That's fantastic news. I mean, it sounds like it's gone really well. But like, what are your aspirations now? I mean, you've obviously worked up to associate assistant principal, and now you've obviously got this project on the side. Like, I mean, what are your aspirations now? Are you going to continue being a teacher? Do you think you'd never leave the profession and focus completely on STEM, or like, what are your aspirations now?
I don't know. I don't know, if I'm honest. I'm just like, I don't know how, first of all, I don't know how I manage my time. It just happens, you know. I just get on with it and then hope for the best. It's like a juggling act. So it's just managing at the moment. In terms of aspirations though, my aspiration has been to be ahead. But we'll see how that goes. You know, nothing is fixed, but at the same time, I love seeing Young Gifted in STEM grow. So it's like, I don't know. Do I see myself in teaching for longer? Yes, I do. I think that in order to really, really, really impact young people, then there's no better place than the classroom. As of course, not to like disregard any of the sort of projects or outreach things that are going on outside, but just, you know, that is what I like to do. But we'll just see where Young Gifted in STEM takes me, really, because it's starting to gain a little bit of traction now. So it's like, whoa, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So just see how it goes.
Attraction in what way? Like, I mean, what when you first started it to where you're at now, what sort of what has been the attraction? I mean, like, how much involvement have people outside of like your close circle kind of got involved into the project?
Yeah, well, when I started it, it was just sort of a little idea. I don't know how it's going to go. Going to see what I can sort of get out of it, like how I can sort of impact and create positive things for young people, and probably just within, you know, my circle of influence. But it's like I'm getting emails now from other organizations that want to do collaborations. I've just been asked to talk on behalf of a company regarding like my point of view. It's literally, it's just like, well, I can't even keep up with it. Yeah, and like proper companies that are out there just want to get in touch and see how we can, as well as universities, and see how we can do joint collaborations. I'm like, whoa, this is actually quite a lot. And we started on Twitter. I think it was, I was on like 5 or something. Like by the next week, I was on like 50, and now I'm on like over 1,200 followers on Young Gifted in STEM. And it's like, okay, well, people are seeing what's happening here, like what we're doing, and like followers is not necessarily a measure of, you know, anything, but it is nice to see that people are they want to be involved in what's happening here. So it's that trying to keep momentum now. After the launch, I want to look at skills-based workshops for young people and really try to have an influence on. I mean, we had attendees from literally all over the place, young people. The feedback that we had was crazy. And I can see that there's a demand for more of that, more of the same. So it's like, yeah, it is gaining some sort of traction.
And on a day-to-day basis, I mean, the main purpose of the project is it to create awareness, or is it to actually work with the students on an individual basis?
It's sort of both. So I obviously want to bring attention to the fact that the STEM workforce shortage is a real thing, and it's costing billions of pounds essentially, because there just aren't enough people, and then the training that's involved to train up people who aren't STEM graduates and that sort of thing. But also I just think that aside from my influence within a school, actually there's not equitable access. There aren't the same opportunities for young people in schools. And so I really just want to be able to work with young people, as you said, whether that's through possibly looking at a mentoring scheme, whether that is looking at, sponsorships and things like that for young people to do work placements and, that sort of thing. So it's sort of a bit of both.
Fantastic. You know what? Just obviously, it's the first time we've spoken in sort of face to face, isn't it? I mean, we kind of mentioned each other on LinkedIn a little bit, but I mean, you're kind of what I expected in some ways, but better. I mean, you're so admirable. Like you're very like you're very humble, but you're so driven and like very like when you speak, like you've got a lot of conviction in the way that you come across, and I can see why kids would buy into you and why you've progressed so well in your career. Like you've got this focus, and like you said, you want to go for headship. I mean, you're literally aiming for the top, which is what you want to see, like from people. And I mean, I think you're a fantastic ambassador of the ethnic minority group. I mean, you've obviously come from an ethnic minority. You've obviously, you may have had your struggles, or I mean, in some ways, some people would even say that the odds were against you being from an ethnic minority and being a woman. But I mean, you've also proved so many people that it can be done, and you'd be a role model for so many people out there. And it's phenomenal to have you on to the podcast, because it's what I want to do. Is I want to create that awareness that you can do well in teaching. You can actually make a difference to these people's lives, and you're an absolute walking evidence of that. And you sort of are remarkable at what you do, and you've obviously had a fantastic career because of it. So I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your journey and your experiences. I mean, is there anything that you'd like to kind of leave us with, that any message that you want to say to anyone, whether it be graduates or teachers or SLT members across the country, even the government? Is there anything that you really want to get across?
Yeah, I just want to say that don't underestimate teachers. They are doing such amazing things. They're doing really, really important sort of jobs. They are essential to the development of society. So we are working really hard, and just don't underestimate us. Teaching is a difficult profession, but it's well worth it. It's it makes a difference, and so that's the main thing that I've tried to leave you with.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much for coming on and taking time to speak to us and share your journey. I mean, it's been remarkable to have you on. So I mean, enjoy the rest of your half term, and thank you so much for coming on, Genevieve.
Thank you for inviting me, TJ.